Good evening and welcome to Political Capital. I'm Karabole Tlatla. Ever since the December elective conference, the new ANC leadership has been on what you might call a victory lap. And they have been celebrated by comrades and financial markets alike. But that will not be sustained unless it's backed up by real substantive action. Joining me now is the newly elected Treasurer General of the African National Congress, Mr. Paul Mashatile. Mr. Mashatile, for your time, I thank you. Mr. Mashatile, one cannot deny that there has been a new breeze, a new feeling of hope within the broader South African public with regards to your election. If you will, we've had rallies with comrades celebrating you, but we've also had rallies with the Rand celebrating your leadership. But, of course, it will not hold. It needs substantive actions to back it up. What substantive action is the new leadership of the ANC focused on with regards to turning the economy around?
Indeed, Karabo, the mood is very positive since our election. But you're quite right. This mood will not be sustained unless people see visible action on the ground. So we have committed ourselves that the biggest priority for us will be what the president of the ANC calls economic recovery. Stemming out of our approach on radical economic transformation, we thought let's prioritize growing the economy and creating jobs. So a number of things will have to be done there. One of them is get government to work efficiently, particularly your state-owned enterprises, sort the governance issues there, stamp out corruption in government, and appoint the right people to boards, the right officials with the requisite skills. So that process has started. As you know, that we immediately changed the board of Escom, appointed an acting CEO, and that's going to happen with all parastatals, get them right so that the issue of creating jobs becomes a reality. It's one of the biggest problems. So we have already started. So when we got to Davos, we were able to say to people, this is what we are doing, not this is what we think.
But they're in Davos, and I believe that Team South Africa got a lot of friends. There was a lot of positive reception of the message of Team South Africa. But my question is, surely it's not all well with the investors. There are lingering questions. What are some of those lingering questions?
Well, firstly, let me say investors were very happy because they were seeing action on our part. Others, of course, wanted to hear more about our policies. Remember that the conference, apart from electing a new leadership, also came up with a whole set of policies for implementation. And I think one of them would have been the issue of land. Expropriation of land without compensation was one issue that I think was in the question of everybody. What we were able to do was to assure everybody that there's not going to be land grabs in South Africa. We've learned from the experiences of Zimbabwe. So expropriation of land without compensation will only be done where there is plans to increase productivity. There is agricultural productivity to ensure that there is food security, but also where there is a need for residential purposes for poor people, where we need to build houses, we'll then look at expropriating land. So it's not free for all.
And the land issue is a very sensitive issue in a sense that it brings anxiety when you hear an announcement like expropriation of land without compensation. It brings anxiety to those that own land, and it also brings anticipation and hope for those that want access to land. These are two diverging positions. How are you going to speak to both constituencies?
Interestingly, Karabo, just 2 weeks ago, I got information that there are a group of farmers that want to meet with the president of the ANC, and the message was, how can we help? So it's not everybody who feels like running away, because there is a lot of land in South Africa that is lying fallow. When you travel in rural areas, we were recently in the Eastern Cape, we ourselves as the leaders of the ANC were saying, but there's a lot of land here that people have access to, maybe we need to assist them to till the land, make implements available and so on, ensuring that they've got access to markets. So we will engage all constituencies. I think the important thing is that the leadership have assured the market that things are going to be done orderly.
I'd like to go back to the issue of land, if you'll just indulge me. Now, 2017 was a very tough year for farmers. We've seen more farms going under the hammer in 2017 than at any other time since 1994. Is this a trend that worries you, considering that ultimately we want land to change hands and farmers have high debt levels? Does it worry you that the state might have to intervene?
In fact, our view is that the state should come with supporting programs, especially for emerging farmers, but generally in the agricultural sector, because some of the people don't till the land because they don't have access to market, but some of them don't even have equipment, especially emerging farmers. So in our engagement with the farming community, we'll be looking at how can the state assist. In some parts of the country, as you know, we do have drought. It makes the situation even more challenging. So I think if I may sum up what is the way forward is that there should be partnership between the state and the farming communities, and the state role must really be able to help. We know that in the past, for instance, the previous government before us were very strong on issues like your land bank and so on to make sure people have access to finance, equipment, seeds, etc. We're looking at those kind of packages.
Now, when I cannot possibly let you go without asking you what's in the contemporary space, if you will. Recently, we've heard through the parliamentary hearings a position of former PRASA CEO Lucky Montana, alleging that your predecessor, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, was trying to channel, if you will, state funds through to the ANC. I know you cannot possibly give me the reasons or any kind of rationale behind that because you were not part of it. But it brings up an interesting question that there has been for a long time this issue of state funds being used to fund political activities. How are you, as the new Treasurer General, going to be, I mean, you have to be ANC's 21st century Treasurer General. In a way, you have to do things differently. How are you going to do things differently to raise funds for the ANC?
Well, firstly, let me say that the former TG did call me yesterday and say, hey, don't be surprised. There was this thing said by Lucky Montana. But please know that it really has nothing to do with the ANC. He didn't really get engaged in those things, and there were funds channeled to the ANC. So like obviously, we'll have to check everything. I haven't done that. But it's quite clear that as a Treasurer General, it's unavoidable to get involved in the space where you meet with investors. Some people may try to lobby you for this and that. I think the important thing is transparency. My view that is the ANC raises funds, it should be done in a most transparent manner. There shouldn't be a suspicion that there are things that are done under the table. So I will meet with the former TG to check in detail what this is all about, but he did assure me that he will brief me.
All right, Mr. Mashatile, the problem at Escom is beyond just changing leadership. I mean, I am all for the competency of Mr. Khadebe, who did a fantastic job when he was at the Land Bank. Mr. Mabuza, who is the chairperson of Escom now and also the chairperson of Telkom, has led many various businesses to great heights. But the problem of Escom, has to do with Escom's self-sustainability. We should be getting a surplus from Escom, not funding Escom. How are we going to get there? And do we have a turnaround plan of how we're going to get Escom out of this debt crisis and get it to actually declare a profit?
Well, as you know, Karabo, that the board was put in place just a week ago. So they are still grappling with that issue themselves.
Can you see that I'm an impatient South African? I represent many South Africans.
And my view is that one of the first thing the board must look at is how to deal with the debt. 367 billion, a lot of money.
Quite a lot.
They need to make sure that they can get the access to funding stream properly. One of the challenges, of course, was that Escom was beginning to have difficulty in accessing funding from the banks and international markets. So they have to look into that. And obviously, the banks are going to say, okay, let's see what are going to be your revenue streams, how are you going to set this debt? You can't obviously deal with it immediately. There are government guarantees that have been given to Escom. They have to use them to ensure that they help them to raise the necessary funding they need, but they need to have a plan to do away with this huge debt. And it will have to do with the proper running of the institution, sort the governance issues, and make sure that the institution is run properly. If you source coal, whatever, you do it the right way. So all the shenanigans that were there before must be rooted out, and the institution must be run properly, and I think it will turn around.
And that shenanigans that was there, that you speak about in Escom, was almost made possible by executives within Escom. When you look at some of the parliamentary hearings that we're going through right now, whether it's Steinhoff or the Escom hearing or any other public entity or private entity for that matter, are you happy with the level of disclosure that we're getting from people who are implicated in these things?
Well, I'm not sure if people are revealing everything, but I think it's important that we really must appoint people who are credible to a large extent. I know human beings are human beings. We can never guarantee 100%, but you have to have systems that are tight. The governance issues must be tightened up so that there is no room for people to do things that are not right. So I'm hoping that not only Escom, as we deal with all the SOEs, even government departments, we will pay special attention to making sure that you try to a large extent to appoint South Africans who have integrity, who have the right skills to be able to do the job. And the governance systems and structures must be in place at all times.
That's my guest, Mr. Paul Mashatile, Treasurer General of the African National Congress. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a bit. Welcome back to Political Capital. I am with my guest, Mr. Paul Mashatile, who is the Treasurer General of the African National Congress. Mr. Mashatile, let's move to the politics of the time. It would be remiss of me not to mention what all South Africans want to ask the top leadership of the African National Congress. What is going on with regards to the issue of the state president, Mr. Jacob Zuma? We understand that the top six and the NEC is working on a dignified exit, but what are the stumbling blocks? What issues are holding us back?
Well, at the moment, let me say there are no stumbling blocks except that we have not met with the president ourselves. The NEC has expressed the view that we need to deal with this matter.
So has the NWC?
So is the NWC, of course. And we assured them that we will meet with the president to discuss it, hear his views, but also tell him our views on how this should be resolved. I did mention when I was speaking in Cape Town recently that it's actually not a new thing. We have now come to realize that unless we come with a sustainable way of dealing with this, it's going to happen all the time, especially when a president is doing a second term in the ANC and government. The term starts changing. You finish in the ANC first, but you still have time in government. 18 months
to go until...
And we realized that during President Mandela's time, the advantage was that he himself immediately gave up
his position in the ANC.
Yeah, he basically said, look, I think Thabo Mbeki will run government. I'm going just to focus on other ceremonial issues. Well, with Thabo Mbeki, when Jacob Zuma was president of the ANC, he was still running government, and so you could see the tension between Luthuli House and government. Hence,
can you feel that tension now?
It has started, yeah. It has started because...
And it's up to you guys to resolve it.
Exactly.
How are you and your colleagues working this? Expectations, because there are expectations. Financial market is expectant too. And it's rallied ever since your election.
Yeah, our view, of course, is that there should be change of guard. You need to transfer power. You can't have two centers of power. We want to see a situation where there is one center and there are no tensions. And the best possible way if the state president exits. Now, but how you do it is to engage with him, go to him and say, look, we're not putting you out, but we think we can work better this way. Hear him out and come back to the NWC. We've promised the NWC that we will come back to you to report. One of the things that we obviously want to avoid as the ANC is to get our President of the Republic, who was President of the ANC, to be moved out of government through a motion of no confidence or impeachment.
And it seems that that's where the opposition parties are taking you.
We want to avoid that. And it's important that we engage with him around those issues.
Is it fair to say that the only way that the ANC and the ANC leadership can deal with the issue is by not letting it get to Parliament? If the motion of no confidence is actually exercised in Parliament, that this could be dire for President Jacob Zuma?
Yes, that's the ideal approach, that we deal with this thing ourselves. And that's why we're meeting the president this week.
I'm going to push you on that. I have to push you on that. My push is, you have to deal with it on or before the State of the Nation address. That's on the 8th. So can I expect something to happen between now and the 7th of February?
Well, I can say that the president has agreed to see us this week. So we will have a discussion and see what we can come up with.
Is it an open agenda? Is it tabulated? What's on this agenda?
Well, it's not a secret meeting, but it's a confidential meeting.
All right, I'll give you that. I'll give you that. Now, the current new leadership of the ANC, especially the top 6, for the first time in a really, really long time of the ANC history, probably barring the first leadership that was elected, it is made of people who were not in exile during the struggle. I coined the phrase, I call it exiles, that the top 6 is made up of people who went through the struggle right here in this country. Does that change the view of how the leadership views what needs to be done for the country?
Well, sometimes very difficult to say what do delegates see, but we can see the outcome ourselves, that if you look at all the 6 of us, none of us were really in exile. There is obviously a view that Comrade Ace might have gone out a bit sometimes, but he was also not really, you can't regard him as somebody who's already spent time in exile. So you're quite right about that observation. My sense is that I think the experience of having been involved in the mass democratic movement, but almost all of us, the 6 of us were in the UDF.
Very prominent in the 80s.
Some of us, the young ones, were in the youth congresses. And perhaps delegates think that experience might be useful for the current period where we are now. And let's see how it goes.
Mr. Mashatile, you were very much campaigning for the now president of the ANC in the lead up to the December conference, and far beyond factions, but you emanated from that conference speaking a message of unity, and it has not necessarily been reflected during this last week. We've had 2 top 6 members saying that President Zuma is going nowhere, while we've been hearing officials on the other side saying that no, the issue is actually on the table. Why is the top 6 not speaking with one voice? Why does it look like the Secretary General is contradicting what the President is saying?
Well, one of the things we discussed on Monday when we met was this issue. And let me say that, Comrade Jessie did say to us that in her interview with the journalists that were talking to her, that's not what she said.
So she was misquoted?
Yes.
But Mr. Mashatile, I have heard him on tape, so that part was not contradicted.
Mr. Mashatile, Comrade Ace, on the other hand, said to us, look, his main message was that there is no decision by the NEC to recall President Zuma, which was correct, because what happened in the NEC is that the matter was discussed, but once the NEC was told that the officials are dealing with it, then the NEC said, okay, you go, deal with it, meet with President Zuma, and come back to us. So he was saying, look, I couldn't possibly have said in a rally, we said President Zuma should go. But we did say as officials that, guys, let's avoid giving an impression that we're not speaking with one voice. Henceforth, we need to close ranks and work together. The message of unity is not going to stop. But our action must not make sure that we don't detract for it. So we discussed the matter openly, and at the end of the meeting of the top 6 on Monday, we're all laughing as friends and saying we're going to make sure that we close rank.
How did you manage to get from that, what I consider a tense meeting, to ending up with laughter, considering that in the middle of that meeting, the precarious situation of the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Mr. Mashatile, who is also the chair of the African National Congress in the Free State. His offices have been raided. His family keeps coming up more and more in the news, especially with regards to doing business with the state. How is the ANC leadership reacting to what is happening around Comrade Mashatile?
Well, so far we didn't discuss that matter. The reason being that when there are issues like this, I think it's important to get proper reports. So if Comrade A's office is raided and there are issues around him, we will get a report. Maybe in the next meeting he'll come and say, look, this is the reason why this was happening. Obviously, coming from this conference, our message as a leadership is integrity, honesty, making sure that we rebuild the moral fiber of the organization, deal with corruption decisively. So Comrade Ace himself, as the SG, has to emphasize the fact that the state must be tough where there is corruption. If at some point there are issues that affect us as a top 6 that comes to issues of corruptions, we're going to deal with them.
According to the ANC in KZN, or at least the youth faction that hosted Mr. Mashatile this past weekend, there was also murmurs that instruments of the state should not be used to settle political scores. That is a very, very strong statement, and it implies a lot of things, and mostly on the position of the new leadership. Is the new leadership using instruments of the state to settle political scores?
No, we will not allow that. But I'm sure that message is not suggesting that they are untouchables, because that will be wrong. I think we can accept the message that say don't use state apparatus to settle political scores, but no one can say don't touch our top officials. If there's wrongdoing, all of us will be touched.
This is a very precarious thing, because essentially it means ANC members will probably have to see to it that other ANC members account for their possible corruption, possible misdeeds. And how will this work out? And how does the ANC stay together when Comrade is basically, prosecuting your comrade?
Well, our view is that we must lead without fear or favor. And when it affects us, we can't then start questioning, state institutions. And so we must protect them. As Comrade Balula was saying recently to the police officers, that you can go after politicians. Where there is corruption, deal with it. Certainly the top 6 of the ANC is not going to protect anyone, including ourselves. Let the law take its course.
Mr. Mashatile, I leave on this question. The State of the Nation is supposed to be happening next week. There's all kinds of talk whether it should be postponed or whether there should be a motion of no confidence on that day. It's really politics playing itself out, if you will. The opposition is doing exactly what they should do. But when you look at an event like State of the Nation, considering that South Africa does not even have the coffers, we've been drawing that budget down further and further each year. Does it still have significance? Do we have to have the State of the Nation?
I've actually haven't given that thought. My sense is that we should, but you could redesign it differently. Because remember, State of the Nation is really an opportunity for President of the Republic to address the nation and say, this is what my government has done, these are the plans for the future. You could certainly do that without a big ceremony. If the issue is caused, maybe we reduce the ceremony. President comes, speaks. A
live broadcast somewhere, CNBC awaits.
Just little refreshments and so on. But I don't think you should do away with the State of the Nation per se, but you could redesign it to be more affordable.
That's Mr. Paul Mashatile, a man with a sense of occasion and the Treasurer General of the African National Congress. Thank you very much for your time, sir, and for being my guest. That's all we have for this week's Political Capital. Be sure to join us again on Tuesday as we continue to follow the developments of this very interesting time in the times of South Africa. Thank you very much. My name is Karabole Tlhatlha.